She didn't bring her daughter to be seen. She brought her because leaving Emily Holmes alone again felt like a different kind of cruelty. That's the truth nobody in that glittering ballroom would ever know. Not the investors raising champagne in Sophia Lancaster's direction. Not the journalists whispering about America's most powerful woman under 40. Not a single person who watched her walk through those doors in a cobalt blue gown with her 8-year-old daughter at her side, quiet as a shadow. They saw a billionaire. They didn't see a mother who cried in the car on the way over because her little girl had asked in careful, patient sign language, "Will anyone talk to me tonight?" And Sophia hadn't known how to answer. If this story already has you feeling something, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Subscribe to this channel and follow every part of this story to the very end, because what happens next in that ballroom will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Hit like if you're already invested, and drop a comment telling me what city and state you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to that night. The Harrington Grand was the kind of hotel that made ordinary people feel like they were trespassing. 40-foot ceilings, chandeliers dripping with crystal, marble floors so polished you could see your own reflection walking beneath you, slightly distorted, like a version of yourself that had made better choices. The annual Children's Future Gala drew the wealthiest philanthropists in the country every November, and the venue made sure every single one of them felt their money was being put to appropriately magnificent use. Sophia Lancaster arrived at 7:42 in the evening, 18 minutes later than she had planned. She had planned for Emily's dress zipper breaking. She hadn't planned for the 40 minutes it took to calm Emily down afterward. Not because her daughter was spoiled, but because Emily had spent 20 minutes in front of the bathroom mirror while Sophia tried to explain in hurried, imprecise sign language that the dress could be fixed, that the evening wasn't ruined, that people weren't going to stare. Emily had stared back at her mother with those enormous brown eyes and signed something slow and deliberate. "You're nervous too." Sophia had laughed, despite herself, pressed a kiss to Emily's forehead, fixed the zipper with a safety pin from the bottom of her purse, and told her they were going anyway. Now they stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, and Sophia felt the familiar cold weight of it settle across her shoulders. The weight of being perceived, of being watched. She'd built a healthcare company worth $4.3 billion from a borrowed office and a clinical trial that most of her investors had written off. She had sat across from senators. She had held her ground in rooms where every other face was male, older, and absolutely certain she didn't belong. She had learned to wear this particular expression. Composed, warm, slightly distant, like armor. But the armor never quite covered Emily. She sighed with one hand, her evening bag dangling from the other wrist. "You okay?" Emily looked up at the enormous room, at the hundreds of people, at the waiters floating between clusters of guests like satellites. She slipped her hand into Sophia's and nodded. But it was the kind of nod that meant, "I'll try." Sophia squeezed once and walked them both in. The first 30 minutes followed a pattern Sophia knew by heart. Colleagues found her, board members, a senator from Connecticut she'd worked with on pediatric healthcare legislation, the CEO of a pharmaceutical distributor who'd been trying to get a meeting with her for 6 months and apparently decided a black-tie gala was the appropriate place to ambush her with pitch statistics. She smiled. She responded. She kept Emily tucked close to her side, and she watched in her peripheral vision the way conversation shifted the moment people noticed her daughter. It wasn't cruelty. That was the part that exhausted Sophia most. It was never outright cruelty. It was the slight pause, the way someone's face would rearrange itself into an expression that was trying too hard to be natural. The too loud, too slow way certain people spoke directly at Emily, even after Sophia explained quietly that her daughter was deaf, not cognitively impaired, and that speaking loudly didn't change anything. The way conversations would find a natural feeling exit about 60 seconds after Emily appeared in them. People weren't mean, they were just uncomfortable. And discomfort, Sophia had learned, was its own kind of wall. By 8:15, Emily had stopped looking at the guests. She had found a spot near the edge of the room, close to one of the massive floral arrangements, cream roses and eucalyptus that climbed nearly to her shoulder. and she was watching the string quartet in the corner. Not listening, obviously, but watching. The way the cellist's whole body moved with the instrument, the way the violinist closed her eyes on the long notes. Emily had always been visual, in a way that quietly broke Sophia's heart and quietly amazed her at the same time. She was drawing patterns on her palm with one finger, something she did when she was trying to entertain herself without making it obvious she was bored. Sophia was talking to a woman named Dr. Patricia Hall, chief of pediatric neurology at a research hospital in Boston. Genuinely lovely, one of the few people at these events Sophia actually liked. And she was trying to keep half her attention on Emily across the room when she saw him. He didn't belong at the Harrington Grand, and he knew it. That much was visible from 30 feet away. Not because of the way he was dressed. His suit was dark, well-fitted, nothing ostentatious, but because of the way he stood. He wasn't working the room, he wasn't scanning for the right person to talk to. He was standing near the bar, holding a glass of water. And he had the particular stillness of someone who had learned in circumstances that had nothing to do with cocktail parties how to go completely quiet. Nathan Cross was 37 years old and looked like someone who had earned every year of it. There were angles to his face that suggested he'd been through things that couldn't be summarized on a gala bio card. He had a scar along his left jaw, faint but visible, that he'd stopped thinking about years ago. His hands wrapped loosely around the water glass were the kind of hands that had done hard work and weren't embarrassed by it. He was there because Marcus Webb had asked him to come. Marcus ran the youth center where Nathan volunteered twice a week, had been running it for 11 years. A stubborn, good-hearted man who had somehow kept the place funded through 3 economic downturns and one very bad year involving a burst pipe and a board dispute. Marcus had a table at the gala and had called Nathan 3 weeks ago and said, "I need you there. You clean up decent enough, and frankly, I need someone in the room who actually knows what these kids' lives look like." Nathan had said yes because Marcus was one of about 6 people whose requests he didn't easily refuse. He had not said yes because he wanted to be at the Harrington Grand on a Friday night, holding water and listening to people discuss their beach houses. He'd told his son Caleb that he'd be home by 11. Caleb was 10, mature enough to stay with the neighbor down the hall for a few hours, and had responded to the news that his dad was attending a fancy charity gala by asking if Nathan was going to have to dance. Nathan had said he hoped not. Caleb had said, good, because Nathan's dancing was, and he was quoting directly, kind of painful to watch. Nathan had ruffled his hair and left feeling slightly more human than he had before. Now he stood at the edge of this ballroom and did what he'd spent years training himself to do in unfamiliar environments. He watched. He noticed the woman first, because everyone noticed her. Sophia Lancaster had a presence that the room organized itself around without realizing it. But what pulled his eyes a moment later wasn't Sophia. It was the little girl by the flowers. She was maybe 8, 9, dark hair pulled back with a few strands already escaping. A pale green dress that someone had cared about. And she was utterly, completely alone in a room full of people. Not because no one was near her, but because no one was with her. Nathan knew that particular kind of alone. He'd seen it in Caleb, in the first year after Kate died, when his son would sit in a room full of his own family and still look like he was somewhere nobody else could reach. He'd seen it in kids at the youth center who came in loud and difficult because quiet and alone had started to feel like the same thing. He watched the girl trace patterns on her palm, watched her study the musicians, watched her keep her eyes carefully away from the rest of the room. Then he watched her turn and catch her mother's eye across the ballroom and sign something quick and small. Nathan went still. He recognized the shapes. He hadn't used American Sign Language in years, not since Kate. Kate, who had learned it working with deaf children at a school in San Diego, who had patiently, tirelessly, lovingly taught him over the course of 2 years because she said she wanted them to be able to talk to more of the world. He'd been a decent student, not fluent the way Kate had been fluent, but functional, capable. He hadn't used it since she died. There hadn't been a reason. He watched the mother sign back quick and distracted her attention, pulled by whoever was talking to her. He watched the little girl's face process that. The slight dimming that came from being half answered. She turned back to the flowers. Nathan set his water glass down on the bar. He didn't have a plan. That wasn't how this worked. He'd spent enough years operating in situations where plans only got you so far before reality took over. He just knew what he was about to do, the way he'd sometimes known in the middle of a mission that had gone sideways, exactly which way to move. He crossed the ballroom. Up close, he could see the slight tension in her small shoulders, the practiced posture of someone who had learned to take up less space than they needed. She was looking at the cellist, who was in the middle of a long, slow phrase, so focused on the bow moving across the strings that she didn't notice Nathan stop a few feet to her right. He waited, not wanting to startle her. When she finally glanced sideways and found him there, her eyes went cautious. She'd been approached by adults at events like this before. He could read it in the slight bracing of her posture. People who wanted to talk to her about what it was like. People who called her sweetie in that particular tone. People who looked at her the way you looked at something that needed to be handled carefully. Nathan raised his hands. "Good evening," he signed. "Are you having an okay night?" The girl didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then something happened to her face that Nathan hadn't quite expected, even though if he'd thought about it, he should have. Her eyes went wide, her lips parted. And for just a moment, before the joy broke through, there was something that looked almost like she'd seen something impossible. Like she'd looked for water in the desert for so long that when she finally found it, she couldn't immediately trust it was real. Then she smiled, and it wasn't the polite, careful smile he'd seen in her posture before. It was enormous and unguarded, and it lit up her whole face. "You know sign language?" She signed back her hands, quick and a little breathless. "I'm a little rusty," he signed honestly. "You'll have to slow down if I miss something." That made her laugh, a real, audible laugh. The kind kids made when they forgot to modulate themselves. A few people nearby glanced over. Emily didn't notice. "My name is Emily," she signed. "Nathan," he signed back. She studied him for a second, with the frank, assessing gaze that children had before they learned to be more subtle about it. "How do you know sign language?" She signed slowly, clearly making an effort to pace herself for him. He thought about how to answer that. He went with the truth. "My wife taught me," he signed, "a long time ago. She worked with kids who were deaf. She said everyone should know how to talk to more people." Emily considered this. Her hands moved again, slower now. "Is she here tonight?" Nathan took a breath. "No," he signed. "She died a few years ago." Emily's face shifted. Not with the awkward discomfort he'd seen on adults when the subject came up, but with something older and more careful. Something that recognized the shape of that particular loss. "I'm sorry," she signed. And she meant it, he could tell. "Thank you," he signed. "Do you like the musicians?" Her whole demeanor changed again, the caution dissolved. She turned toward the string quartet, and her hands started moving with an enthusiasm that made him work hard to keep up, signing about how she couldn't hear the music, but she could feel it in the floor sometimes if she stood a certain way. And she'd been watching how the cellist's face changed depending on what the piece was doing. And did he think it was possible to understand music without hearing it? Because she thought it might be, but she wasn't sure. Nathan answered each question as steadily as he could, asking her to repeat the parts he missed telling her when she'd lost him, watching her patiently circle back and try different shapes. They talked about the musicians, about her paintings. She said she painted mostly from things she imagined, not things she saw. About a book she was reading about a girl who went on an adventure in a flying machine. About dogs, because Nathan had mentioned that Caleb had been asking for one, and Emily had very strong opinions about what breed they should get and why. Nathan wasn't sure how long they'd been talking. Long enough that he'd stopped being careful about his rusty signing and started just talking, letting instinct and memory carry what technique didn't. Long enough that he'd almost forgotten where they were. He became aware of Sophia Lancaster standing about 8 feet behind him. He didn't turn around immediately. He didn't want to interrupt Emily, who was in the middle of explaining the specific advantages of a golden retriever over a Labrador, with the kind of passionate specificity that only 8-year-olds brought to their arguments. He finished responding, watched Emily's face go still as she registered something over his shoulder. Then he turned. Sophia Lancaster was not what the magazine covers had prepared him for. She was beautiful, yes, in person more starkly so than photographs caught with the kind of bone structure that had nothing to do with trying. But what knocked the composure out of his chest wasn't her appearance, it was her face. She had clearly been standing there for a while, long enough for her expression to have moved through several things before arriving at where it was now, which was somewhere between destroyed and completely undone. Her eyes were wet. She wasn't bothering to pretend they weren't. She had one hand pressed flat to her sternum, like she was holding herself together from the inside. She looked at Emily, then at Nathan, then back at Emily, who was watching her mother with a careful, questioning expression. Sophia's voice when she spoke was quieter than he expected. "How long have you been—" She stopped, tried again. "She's been talking this whole time—" "About 15 minutes, maybe," Nathan said. "I lost track." Sophia pressed her lips together, nodded once in the tight way people nodded when they were trying not to fall apart in a room full of people who were watching them. Because people were watching. Nathan had registered it somewhere in the last few minutes without quite prioritizing it. The way nearby conversations had gone soft. The way clusters of guests had oriented themselves toward this corner of the ballroom. A man with a camera editorial, not personal, had drifted into range. Sophia ignored all of it. She crouched down to Emily's eye level, signing something Nathan didn't try to read. A private exchange. Emily responded, glanced at Nathan, responded again. Sophia pressed her hand briefly to Emily's cheek, a gesture so instinctive and practiced it clearly came from 10,000 repetitions. Then she stood. She looked at Nathan with an expression that was still trying to reassemble itself into something more composed and not quite getting there. "I'm Sophia," she said, like she thought he might not know. Like that particular information had stopped feeling like the most important thing about her standing here. "Nathan Cross," he said. She glanced down at his hands, back up at his face. "Where did you—" "My late wife worked with deaf children," he said before the question could cost her something. "She spent 2 years teaching me. I'm rusty. Your daughter was very patient with me." Emily had caught the words late wife and my wife and glanced between them with the careful attention she brought to conversations she was partially following. Sophia looked at him for a moment. He didn't look away. "Thank you," she finally said. And the 2 words landed with the full weight of everything she couldn't say in a ballroom, in front of photographers and peers and the people who had spent the last 2 hours making her daughter feel like furniture. "I didn't do anything special," Nathan said. "That's exactly what makes it—" She stopped herself again, shook her head like she'd started a sentence that was going somewhere she wasn't ready to go in public. Emily tugged at her mother's hand, signed something quick. Sophia looked at her daughter. Her eyes went soft in a way that had nothing to do with composure or armor or billion-dollar boardrooms. She signed back. Emily answered. There was a small back-and-forth one that felt like an argument, the way arguments between mothers and daughters who loved each other felt. Warm, familiar, with the outcome already quietly decided. Then Emily turned to Nathan. She signed slowly and deliberately, watching him with those serious brown eyes to make sure he was getting it. "Can you stay a little while longer?" Nathan thought about Caleb at home with the neighbor. Thought about the 11 o'clock he'd promised. Thought about Marcus across the room, who would almost certainly not mind. He looked at Emily. He looked at Sophia, who was watching him with an expression she wasn't trying to control anymore. "Sure," he signed back. "I'm not going anywhere." Emily's smile came back slower this time, but bigger. And across the ballroom, without anyone announcing it, the evening shifted. The photographer was the first problem. Nathan noticed him about 3 minutes after Sophia introduced herself. A man in his mid-30s with press credentials clipped to his jacket, working his way closer with the particular patient efficiency of someone who did this for a living. He wasn't being obvious about it. He was angling his shots toward the far end of the room, then drifting, then angling again, letting the drift look casual. Nathan had been around enough people who moved with purpose disguised as aimlessness to recognize the pattern immediately. He didn't say anything to Sophia. She had enough to manage. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, repositioning so that his back was mostly to the photographer's line of approach, giving Emily a natural barrier without making it a production. It was the kind of small, automatic adjustment that he'd stopped noticing himself making years ago. In grocery stores, in parks, anywhere he and Caleb went where the sightlines weren't clean. Old habits from a life he'd officially left didn't have the decency to actually leave. Emily, meanwhile, had pulled Sophia into the conversation with the determination of a child who had been waiting for exactly this configuration of adults. She signed something to Nathan, then looked at her mother to make sure Sophia was catching it. "She wants to know if I think the cellist is sad," Nathan said. Sophia blinked. "Sad?" She says his face looks like someone thinking about something that already happened. Sophia looked toward the quartet. The cellist was a heavy-set man in his 60s, silver-haired, bowing through something slow and deliberate. His expression was inward, the kind of face a person made when the music required them to go somewhere private. "She's not wrong," Sophia said quietly. Nathan relayed it. Emily's eyes lit up with the satisfaction of being taken seriously. And she launched into an explanation, which Nathan translated in pieces, losing a few words here and there, and filling gaps with educated guesses about how she could always tell when musicians were pretending versus when they were actually inside the song. She developed her own system for reading it. Jaw tension, the angle of the eyebrows, whether the shoulders moved with the phrases or stayed still. "She's been working this out on her own," Nathan asked. "For about 2 years," Sophia said. There was something careful in her voice, careful and heavy at the same time. "She can't talk about it at school the way other kids talk about music, so she just observes, builds her own framework." Emily had noticed they were talking about her. She signed a question to Nathan. "Are you explaining my music system?" he translated. Sophia laughed, short, surprised. "Yes." Emily signed again. "She says you always leave out the part about how she figured out that classical musicians have more layers than pop musicians." "I didn't know that was part of the system," Sophia said, and this time the laugh came easier. And Nathan watched some of the tightness across her shoulders release slightly, the way tension sometimes did when a person found something genuinely funny in the middle of a night that had been wearing them down. They stood there, the three of them, while the quartet moved into something that felt more like movement than the previous piece. And Emily divided her attention between the musicians and the conversation, inserting herself through Nathan whenever she had something to add. Occasionally growing impatient with the relay and making Sophia interpret directly, which Sophia did, haltingly apologizing twice for signs she wasn't sure she was reading correctly. "You're fine," Nathan said. "I lose things too." "She signs faster when she's excited," Sophia said. "I miss words." "Same," Nathan said. "I asked her earlier what breed of dog she wanted, and she signed something I interpreted as German Shepherd. Apparently she meant Golden Retriever. We had a whole debate about German Shepherds before she figured out what I'd misread." Emily had caught enough of that to know what they were laughing about. She signed something indignant. "She says German Shepherds are excellent dogs," Nathan translated, "but Golden Retrievers are better for families with children." "She's right," Sophia said. Emily signed again with the air of someone closing an argument. "And she says if your son wants a dog, she'll help you pick one, because she's done more research than either of us." Sophia looked at Nathan with an expression that was still sorting itself out, trying to settle on something it could stay at, instead of cycling through the range it had been running since she'd walked up behind him 15 minutes ago. He'd seen that kind of expression on people before, usually in situations with higher stakes than a charity gala. It was the expression of someone who'd been holding a complicated weight for a long time, and had just discovered, without planning for it, that someone else was willing to carry part of it for a minute. It didn't mean they trusted you yet. It just meant they were tired. "How old is your son?" she asked. 10. Caleb. He said it the way he always said it, like the name itself had some specific gravity. "He's home tonight with our neighbor. I told him 11. Sophia glanced at the time on the small watch on her wrist. The only jewelry she wore that looked like it actually meant something to her. Scratched on one side, older than everything else about her appearance. It's 9:20. I know. You don't have to stay. He looked at Emily, who had turned back to the musicians and was tracking the second violinist now with that same focused, analytical attention. I know, he said again. Sophia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, more measured. The tone of someone choosing their words with more care than the conversation strictly required because the words were covering something else. She usually lasts about an hour at these things before she starts looking for ways to disappear. She's been talking to you longer than she's talked to anyone in months. Nathan didn't answer immediately. There wasn't a good answer that wouldn't make it worse. Wouldn't underscore the specific sadness contained in the sentence, longer than she's talked to anyone in months. She has a lot to say, he said finally. Sophia pressed her lips together, nodded, and didn't say anything else. Because she was looking at Emily again with that expression, the one that was part love and part something that had no clean name. The particular ache of watching your child be more resilient than anyone should have to be. Nathan understood that one. He'd worn it himself for 3 years. Marcus found him at 9:35. Nathan had seen him approaching from across the room. Marcus Webb was not a subtle presence. A broad-shouldered 60-year-old Haitian-American who had grown up in circumstances that had made him constitutional, incapable of moving through any room without filling it a little. He had gray at his temples and laugh lines deep enough to date him, and he wore his suits the way men wore suits who had learned late in life that they sometimes had to. He was also looking at Nathan with an expression that mixed genuine curiosity with something Nathan privately categorized as Marcus being delighted with himself about something. Mr. Cross, Marcus said, arriving at the edge of their small group with a warmth that wasn't performance. It never was with Marcus. He looked at Sophia first. Miss Lancaster, Marcus Webb. I run the Center for Youth Connection over on Halstead. We have a table tonight. I know the center, Sophia said. You've done remarkable work. We try, Marcus said with the particular modesty of someone who meant it. Then he looked at Nathan and at Emily, and Nathan watched him take in the whole picture. The signing, the proximity, the way Emily was fractionally turned toward Nathan like a plant toward a light source. He looked back at Nathan with an expression Nathan had been on the receiving end of enough times to recognize. It was Marcus's version of, I see what's happening here, and I'm choosing not to make it weird. I was going to come drag you toward the Caldwell table, Marcus said. Mr. Caldwell has some thoughts on youth programming he wanted to share. However, he glanced at Emily, at Sophia, back at Nathan. I'm thinking Mr. Caldwell's thoughts can wait. Marcus, Nathan said. He said it simply the way you said something when you weren't going to argue about it. The Caldwell table will survive. He made a small, courteous bow toward Sophia, and Emily told Sophia it was a genuine pleasure, and headed back across the room with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking entirely too pleased. Nathan watched him go. Friend of yours? Sophia asked. He's the reason I'm here, Nathan said. He runs the youth center where I volunteer. What do you do there? It was a genuine question. He could tell by the way she asked it. Not the social version of the question, which expected a one-sentence answer and was already preparing the response. The real version. Whatever needs doing, he said. Mostly I run the Friday afternoon sessions. Kids who need somewhere to be after school. We do activities, building projects, some sports, art. A lot of it is just, he thought about how to put it. Being there, showing up consistently. For a lot of these kids, the adults in their lives cycle in and out. They've learned to wait for the exit. So sometimes the most useful thing you can do is just keep coming back. Sophia was watching him. Emily had turned slightly to follow the conversation, reading what she could from context and expressions. And Sophia leaned down and signed a quick summary for her. Emily looked at Nathan with new attention, signed something to Sophia. She wants to know how many kids, Sophia translated. On a Good Friday, 60, 70, Nathan said. Emily's hands moved again. She says that's a lot of kids who needed somewhere, Sophia said. Nathan said, she signs the way you talk sometimes, direct. She doesn't see the point of going around things. Neither do I, Sophia said. There was affection in it. And also something that sounded like it had been hard-won, like she'd had to learn to match that directness instead of softening it. Neither do I, Nathan said. Somewhere around 10 o'clock, the gala moved into its formal program, which meant a podium at the front of the room, a microphone, and a succession of speakers who each believed their remarks were more essential than everyone else's. The guests reorganized themselves toward the round tables in the center of the room. Sophia had a table near the front, which was unavoidable given who she was. Nathan found himself occupying the empty chair next to Emily. The chair had apparently been designated for Sophia's assistant, who had sent an apologetic text at 6 p.m. about a family emergency. He hadn't planned to sit down. He'd been intending to say goodnight when the program started. But Emily had looked at the chair, then at him, with a question in her eyes that wasn't quite a request and was more than one, and he'd sat down without making a decision about it. Sophia noticed. She didn't say anything. The program opened with a video presentation about childhood poverty in urban school districts, which was well-produced and appropriately difficult to watch. Nathan watched Emily watch the screen. She couldn't follow the narration, obviously, and there were no captions, something that clearly hadn't occurred to the production team. But she watched the images with that same intense, building, specific attention she gave everything. Kids on playgrounds. Classrooms. A small boy sitting outside a school with his backpack on his knees. She tapped Nathan's arm. He leaned toward her. She signed, making sure he could see her hands in the dim light. Does your center look like that? He thought about the honest answer. Some days, he signed. We try to make it better. She thought about that, then signed again. Is it enough? He was quiet for a second. Emily waited, watching him with the patience of someone who had learned that the best answers sometimes required a moment. I don't know, he signed honestly. We keep trying. She accepted that, turned back to the screen, and Nathan became aware that Sophia, on Emily's other side, had been watching the exchange. Not reading the sign specifically, but watching his face and Emily's, and the particular quality of attention that was passing between them. She looked away when she noticed him notice. The speaker at the podium was a 40-something man in a suit that probably cost more than Nathan's entire wardrobe, delivering statistics about pediatric healthcare gaps with the kind of rehearsed passion that made the statistics feel slightly less real than they were. Nathan watched Sophia's face while the man spoke. She was listening, but there was something restrained in it, like she was waiting for him to say something specific and prepared to be disappointed. He's not wrong, she said under her breath. Not really to Nathan. But, Nathan said, also quiet. She glanced at him, back at the stage. But the gaps he's talking about, he's describing them from the outside, like problems that need better systems. She paused. They do need better systems, that's true. But they also need people who are willing to get inside them. Nathan didn't have a response to that. Partly because she was right, and partly because she wasn't saying it to get one. She was thinking out loud, something he suspected she didn't do often in rooms like this, where thinking out loud cost you something. Emily tugged her sleeve. Sophia signed a quiet explanation. Emily signed back something Nathan caught in pieces. When does it end? And I'm hungry. Sophia covered a laugh with her hand and signed that they'd get something after. The speaker wrapped his remarks. There was applause. Another speaker replaced him. Nathan looked at the time. 10:17. He was going to have to make a decision soon. The reception tables opened at 10:30. The formal program ended with a standing ovation for a 14-year-old who had started a tutoring network in her school district and made 3 grown men in the front row visibly emotional, which Nathan thought said good things about her and also good things about those particular men. Emily had watched her the entire time, and when the girl stepped back from the podium, Emily signed something to Nathan quickly. She's not scared at all. No, he agreed. She isn't. I want to be like that. He looked at Emily directly. You already are, he signed. You just don't always know it yet. Emily looked at him with the skeptical expression of an 8-year-old processing a compliment. She wasn't sure she believed it. It was the most kid expression he'd seen on her face all night. The flicker of regular childhood underneath the composure she'd had to build around herself too early. She signed, My mom always says that too. Then your mom and I are both right. She thought about it, then signed, Maybe. He bit down on a smile. That was a very specific, very honest kind of concession. And it was exactly the kind of answer Caleb would give. The tables opened and the room began its informal second half. Sophia navigated a steady stream of people who wanted to speak with her. Colleagues, organizers, 2 journalists who were politely but clearly going to file stories regardless of whether she cooperated. Nathan got Emily a plate from the reception table. Small sandwiches cut into triangles, fruit, a chocolate tart that she approved of immediately. He got himself a cup of coffee and ate nothing because it was late and he'd already had dinner. He watched Sophia move through those conversations. She was good at them. Technically excellent, actually. The kind of person who could make every individual in a rapid succession of exchanges feel like the most attended-to person in the room. But he noticed now, having paid attention, the way her gaze came back to Emily at regular intervals. Not anxiously, or not only anxiously. Something more fundamental. The way you checked on a compass. At 10:50, the photographer reappeared. This time he was more direct about it. He approached Sophia while she was between conversations, introduced himself, someone from a business publication Nathan had seen on newsstands, and asked if he could get a photo of her with her daughter. Very brief, he assured her, just something warm. Sophia's expression went through a small, fast series of adjustments before landing on composed and politely firm. Not tonight, she said. Emily doesn't... Events like this aren't great for... Oh, it's very quick. She said not tonight, Nathan said. It was quiet, not loud. He hadn't moved from where he was standing, which was approximately 4 feet from the conversation, which he had technically not been part of. The photographer looked at him with the expression people made when someone had said something that required recalibration. Nathan looked back at him without anything particular in his expression. No aggression, no performance, just still. The photographer looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at Nathan for a half-second with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she looked back at the photographer with the same composed firmness and said, "Thank you for understanding," with a finality that closed the conversation. The photographer left. Sophia turned to Nathan. She started to say something, stopped. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I know. I was handling it." "I know that too." She looked at him with an expression that was trying to decide if it was annoyed. It didn't quite get there. "Do you make a habit of stepping into other people's conversations?" "No," he said. But the photographer had already been given a clear answer and was going to keep pushing. He paused. "If I overstepped, I'm sorry." She was quiet for a moment. Emily had watched the exchange with focused attention. She'd caught the body language of the photographer, leaving quickly Sophia's expression and Nathan's stillness. And she was now looking between them with the specific calculation of a child deciding how seriously to take something. Sophia looked at Emily. Something passed between them in a glance, something that had the quality of a shorthand developed over years. "It's fine," Sophia said to Nathan. And then more quietly, in a tone that didn't require him to respond, "Thank you," he nodded. At 11:15, Sophia found him near the bar, where he'd started the evening. Water, again. Because the night had already been more than he expected, and he needed a clear head for the drive home. "You've stayed much later than you planned," she said. "I texted the neighbor," he said. "Caleb's asleep. She said she'd stay until I'm back." Sophia leaned against the bar beside him at the angle that let her keep Emily in her sightline, across the room. Emily, who had found Marcus Webb and was apparently interrogating him about the youth center with the same systematic energy she brought to musician analysis. Marcus was responding with complete seriousness, leaning down to her level, and Nathan felt something settle in his chest at the sight of it. "She hasn't done this in a while," Sophia said. She wasn't looking at Nathan, she was watching Emily. "Gone towards someone she doesn't know. Usually it goes the other way." "She tested me first," Nathan said. "I noticed she was checking if I was going to be weird about it." Sophia's mouth curved slightly. "And were you?" "I was rusty on about a third of her signs. And I thought she wanted a German shepherd." The almost smile went the rest of the way. It changed her face considerably, made her look less like the version of herself that was managing everything and more like someone who'd had a genuinely unusual night and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "What made you come over earlier tonight when you saw her?" Nathan considered the question. He thought about the German Shepherd version, the easy version, the version that summarized itself in a sentence. He didn't go with that. "I saw a kid who was completely alone in a room full of people," he said, "and I knew how to say something to her. That seemed like enough of a reason." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "A lot of people in this room could see the same thing," she said, not as an accusation, just factually. "Maybe," Nathan said, "but I was the one whose wife spent 2 years teaching him sign language in the kitchen on Sunday mornings." He hadn't meant to say the last part quite that specifically. It had come out whole, the way memories sometimes did when your guard was down with all their texture still intact. Kate at the kitchen table with her coffee and her handwritten flashcards, patient and laughing at him when he got the hand shapes wrong. Never making him feel like he was slow, just encouraging him to try again. He hadn't thought about those Sunday mornings in a while. Or he'd thought about them in the sealed-off way he kept most things about Kate. Handled from a distance, carefully, like something fragile. Sophia heard the shift in it. She didn't push. "She sounds like she was someone worth knowing," she said. "Yeah," Nathan said. "She was." They stood there for a moment in the quiet between those words, while the gala wound down around them, while Emily quizzed Marcus Webb on youth programming metrics, and the string quartet played something Nathan didn't recognize, that the floor was carrying faintly up through the soles of his shoes. Sophia looked at him. Her face was steadier now than it had been all night. Though steadier didn't mean closed, it meant settled. Like she'd come through something and found herself on the other side of it, still standing. Not entirely sure of the terrain, but no longer bracing. "I don't usually talk to people at these things," she said, "beyond what I have to." "I don't usually come to these things at all," Nathan said. "Why did you really?" He thought about Marcus on the phone 3 weeks ago, about saying yes because Marcus asked, about Caleb on the couch asking if Nathan was going to have to dance, about how none of it had felt significant until he'd walked into this room and seen a small girl drawing patterns on her palm by herself under a chandelier. "My friend asked me to," he said, "and I've learned that when Marcus Webb asks you to do something, there's usually a reason you can't see yet." Sophia looked across the room to where Marcus was now walking with Emily toward the reception table, talking with his hands in the animated way he had. And Emily was watching his face with that bright, systematic attention she gave everything worth understanding. She watched them for a moment. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and you can say no." Nathan waited. "There's a small event next month. Very low-key. A reception for families of children with disabilities. Emily's come with me before. It's quieter than this." She paused. "I'd like to bring her somewhere she might actually be able to talk to someone again, rather than waiting for that person to find her." Nathan understood what she was asking, and also what she wasn't quite asking. "I'll come," he said. Sophia nodded once. She pulled a card from somewhere, the kind of small, practical magic that people with evening bags managed, and held it toward him. He took it. Emily reappeared at Sophia's side, carrying a small plate with a chocolate tart on it. A second one, he noticed, which she extended toward Nathan with the authority of someone distributing something they'd decided he needed. He took it. She signed something at him quick and satisfied. "She says you've been here a long time and haven't eaten anything," Sophia translated. "And that's not good for you." Nathan looked at the tart, then at Emily, who was watching him with her arms crossed in an expression of 8-year-old supervision. "Thank her for me," he said. Sophia signed it. Emily signed something back. "She says you're welcome," Sophia said. "And also that she looked up golden retrievers when she got home, and she's prepared to send you her research." Nathan laughed, and it surprised him slightly the way real laughter sometimes did after a long stretch without it. It came from somewhere uncalculated, and it was louder than he intended. Emily grinned. He ate the tart. It was good. The evening was late, and Caleb was asleep across town, and tomorrow was Saturday with its ordinary weight of laundry and groceries, and a 10-year-old who would want pancakes. But right now, Nathan Cross stood in the remnants of a party he hadn't wanted to attend and felt for the first time in longer than he could accurately track like the evening had amounted to something. He stayed another 20 minutes. He didn't think about leaving once. The card sat on Nathan's kitchen counter for 4 days before he did anything about it. He wasn't avoiding it exactly. He noticed it every morning when he made coffee. White cardstock, clean font. Sophia Lancaster's name and a direct line beneath it. And every morning he registered it and moved on to the more immediate requirements of the day. Getting Caleb's lunch together, checking the weather, driving to the youth center on Tuesday and Thursday, running the Friday session, doing the 1,000 small maintenance tasks that kept a household with 1 adult and 1 growing child from coming apart at the seams. On the 5th day, Caleb found the card. He was doing homework at the kitchen table, and apparently the card had migrated under a notebook and then back out again. Nathan looked up from the stove to find his son holding it with the specific, focused attention he gave things that seemed like they might be information. "Who's Sophia Lancaster?" Caleb asked. "Someone I met at that event Marcus took me to," Nathan said. He turned the burner down slightly. "Put that back." Caleb put it back, but he was quiet in the particular way that meant he was still thinking about it. And after about 90 seconds of apparent homework focus, he said without looking up, "Is she your friend?" "I just met her." "That doesn't answer it." Nathan looked at his son. Caleb was 10 years old and had Kate's eyes and Nathan's habit of going directly at the thing he actually wanted to know, which was both a quality Nathan admired and one that regularly caught him off guard. He had a pencil tucked behind his ear and a smear of something that might have been peanut butter on his left sleeve, and he was watching his father with the patient, direct attention of a kid who had learned early that adults often took longer to say things than necessary. "She has a daughter who's deaf," Nathan said. "I was able to talk to her, sign with her. Her name's Emily." Caleb's expression shifted into something more interested. "How old?" 8. "That's like 2nd grade." "About." Caleb thought about this, went back to his homework. Then, after another minute, "Is Emily why the card's still on the counter?" Nathan did not have an answer for that. Or he had one, but it was more complicated than a Tuesday evening kitchen conversation warranted. "Finish your homework," he said. Caleb finished his homework. Nathan called the number on Thursday. He thought about texting. Texting was easier, less exposure, more controlled. But he called because that was what he actually meant by it. And he'd long ago decided that doing the easier version of things out of vague discomfort was a habit he didn't want Caleb to learn from watching him. It rang twice. "This is Sophia?" The professional reflex, clipped, prepared. The voice of someone who took calls all day that required her to be immediately competent. "It's Nathan Cross," he said, "from the Harrington Gala." A beat, not long, half a second, but he heard it. The adjustment from professional context to this context. "I know who you are, Nathan," she said, and the tone had shifted, not warmer exactly, but more honest, less armored. "I was starting to think the card ended up in a coat pocket somewhere." "Kitchen counter," he said. It's been a complicated week. Those happen, she said, and there was something in the way she said it that indicated she was familiar with the concept. He asked about the reception she'd mentioned. She gave him the details. 3 weeks away. A Saturday afternoon, a community center on the north side that an advocacy group used for family events. She described it the way she'd described it at the gala. Low-key, smaller, families and children not investors and journalists. Emily keeps asking if you're coming, she said. It was stated neutrally as a fact, but the fact had weight. Tell her I'll be there, Nathan said. Another beat, 3 full seconds. Okay, she said, and then, she also wanted me to ask whether you've made any decisions about the dog. Nathan exhaled through his nose. Tell her the research she sent was thorough. She'll want a more specific answer than that. Tell her we're still in the discussion phase. She'll want to know what the obstacles are. Tell her, Nathan said, the 10-year-old boys are unpredictable about follow-through on pet care commitments. There was a pause, and then Sophia laughed. Quiet, genuine, caught slightly off guard. And Nathan heard in it the same quality he'd noticed at the gala. The laugh that came before she'd gotten around to deciding whether to allow it. I'll tell her you need more data, she said. That's fair. They ended the call. Nathan stood in the hallway of his apartment for a moment with the phone in his hand, aware of something he didn't immediately examine. The way the call had gone. The specific ease of it. The way the conversation had shifted register without announcing itself. He filed it carefully in the category of things he wasn't ready to look at directly, and went back to the kitchen to start dinner. Caleb was still at the table, ostensibly doing reading, but his eyes came up when Nathan walked in. Was that her? He asked. Yes, Nathan said. Did she sound nice? Nathan opened the cabinet for pasta. She sounds like someone who's had to be sharp for a long time and hasn't decided yet if she can stop. Caleb considered this. Is that good or bad? Neither, Nathan said. It's just true. The community center on Marchfield Avenue had a parking lot with a pothole problem and a front entrance with a hand-painted mural of children playing that had been added sometime in the last decade and had weathered into something slightly more impressionistic than originally intended. Nathan arrived 8 minutes early, which was his standard, and sat in the car for 3 of those minutes because Caleb had asked to come, and Nathan had thought about it and said yes, and now he was second-guessing that decision in the contained, quiet way he second-guessed most decisions that involved mixing the different compartments of his life. Caleb sat beside him in the passenger seat. He'd been sitting in the front since he turned 10, a matter he'd presented as a formal case about height and legroom, and he was looking at the building with interest. Is this the event? He asked. Yes. How many kids will be there? I don't know. Sophia said maybe 30 families. Caleb absorbed this. And Emily the deaf girl, she'll be there. That's the plan. Do I need to know sign language? Some basics would help, Nathan said. I showed you a few things this week. Caleb held up his hand and produced a reasonably accurate hello, then a slightly less accurate my name is, then pointed at himself. Nathan had spent 20 minutes on Monday night going over fundamentals with him. Hello, thank you, nice to meet you, what's your name? And Caleb had applied himself to it with the methodical focus he brought to things he decided were worth his time. That's good, Nathan said. I've been practicing, Caleb said. Which Nathan had noticed, because he'd caught his son signing to himself in the bathroom mirror on Wednesday morning, which was Caleb's version of taking something seriously. They went in. The reception room was a long rectangle with high windows and fluorescent lighting, and round tables covered with paper tablecloths that had been decorated, apparently by children, with marker drawings of varying skill levels. Someone had strung lights along one wall and put out a table with snacks that anchored one end of the room. It smelled like coffee and sugar and the particular indoor scent of a building used heavily by people who had things to do. Nathan recognized it immediately. Not the specific building, but the kind of place, the kind of effort visible in it. Real people doing real work with limited resources, and making it look through sheer persistence like something. There were maybe 40 families, children of various ages, several in wheelchairs, some with visible hearing devices, some with adults who were clearly interpreters. The noise level was particular, not loud in the ordinary event sense, but layered. A mix of voices and signed conversations and the specific laughter of children who had found each other. Nathan spotted Sophia before she spotted him. She was across the room talking to a woman with a clipboard, someone organizing by the look of it. And she was wearing a dark sweater and her hair was down, which he hadn't seen before. And she looked, without the gala context around her, like a different version of herself. Not diminished, if anything, the opposite. Like the gala version was the constructed one, and this was closer to the actual architecture. Emily was 3 feet away from her, and she had already found another child. The other girl was maybe 9, also deaf. Nathan read it from the hearing aid visible on her left ear, and the signs moving between her and Emily, which were not slow or careful, the way Emily had signed with Nathan at first, but rapid and assumed. The shorthand of 2 people speaking a shared language. Emily's whole body was different from the gala. There was no posture management, no composed reserve, no drawing patterns on her palm. She was fully in motion, signing with the quick, unself-conscious speed that Nathan had seen briefly at the gala when she forgot to pace herself for him. And the other girl was matching it. And they were both laughing about something Nathan couldn't entirely follow from across the room. He felt Caleb stop walking beside him. "Is that her?" Caleb asked. "Yeah," Nathan said. Caleb watched Emily for a moment, with the serious, evaluating gaze of a 10-year-old forming an opinion. Nathan waited. "She signs really fast," Caleb said. "She does. Is that what it looks like when people who actually know it talk to each other?" "More or less." Caleb watched another few seconds. Then he said, with a matter-of-fact certainty that Nathan recognized as Caleb having decided something, "I want to learn more." Nathan looked at his son. "Okay," he said. Sophia saw them from across the room and made her way over with the ease of someone moving through a space they'd been in before. Not a hostess practice glide, something more grounded. She moved like a person who had set things down and hadn't picked them back up. "You made it," she said to Nathan. Her eyes went to Caleb. "And you brought reinforcements." "This is Caleb," Nathan said. Caleb put out his hand, which was something Nathan had not specifically coached him on. Just something Kate had taught him early, and it had stuck. Sophia shook it with appropriate seriousness. "Nathan's told me you've been thinking about getting a dog," she said. Caleb looked at his father with an expression that was approximately 60% surprised and 40% informed. "He told you about that." "Emily has opinions on the subject," Sophia said. "She may want to discuss it with you." Caleb's expression reorganized itself into something Nathan would describe as cautiously interested. "Okay," he said. "I've been thinking it should probably be a bigger dog." "Emily's position is golden retriever," Sophia said. "She has documentation." "I'm open to documentation," Caleb said, with the gravity of a small adult. Sophia looked at Nathan. Her expression had something in it that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite something else. A quiet knowing recognition that Nathan received and didn't push on. "Come on," she said. "I'll introduce you." Emily registered Caleb's existence with the instant, categorical interest of a child who had just identified someone potentially useful to her understanding of the world. She finished her sentence to the other girl, who was named Jess Nathan, gathered and was apparently from the same school district, though a different school, and turned to face Caleb with her full attention. She signed something. Nathan translated, "She says she knows who you are." Caleb looked slightly startled. "How, Emily," Sophia said, and her signing had the tone of a mother covering a slight overstep. Emily signed again, unapologetically. "She says her mother mentioned you," Nathan said, "and that she has thoughts about the dog situation." Caleb considered this for a moment. Then, very carefully, with the particular deliberateness of someone using a skill they'd been practicing in the bathroom mirror, he raised his hands and signed, "Hello, nice to meet you." Emily's reaction was immediate and disproportionate in the best way. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Nathan, back at Caleb. Then she signed something very fast at Nathan. "He learned some signs," Nathan translated. "Did I teach him?" "I showed him a few things," Nathan said. "He did the rest." Emily turned back to Caleb with the expression of someone who has just upgraded their assessment of a situation. She signed slowly and precisely, pacing herself, the way she'd paced herself for Nathan, which Nathan understood was a form of consideration. Nathan watched Caleb watch her hands, watched his son absorb the shapes, and then, with visible concentration, produce a response. Imperfect, slightly slow, but identifiable. Jess, watching from beside Emily, looked at Caleb and then at Emily with an expression that Nathan read as impressed against her expectations. She signed something at Emily. Emily signed back. Jess signed at Caleb, cautiously. Caleb looked at Nathan for help. "She's asking if you want to learn more," Nathan said. "She's offering to help." Caleb turned back to Jess. He nodded, and then, remembering, produced the thumbs up and nodded, which technically meant something slightly different in ASL context, but communicated enthusiasm well enough. Both girls seemed satisfied with this. Jess signed something that Nathan caught as, "Okay, we'll start slow," and possibly something about the snack table. Within 4 minutes, Caleb had been absorbed into the orbit of Emily and Jess, and was being walked by 2 small, determined girls through a signing lesson near the windows that involved a fair amount of laughing at his mistakes and a fair amount of patient correction. He was taking it the same way he took most things he'd decided mattered, with focus and a specific willingness to look foolish in the process. Nathan watched this from 8 feet away and felt something in the region of his chest that he'd gotten better at identifying over the years. Gratitude. The specific kind that came unexpectedly from ordinary moments that turned out to be larger than they appeared. He was aware of Sophia standing beside him. "He's good with her," she said. "He's good with most people," Nathan said. His mother was the same way. He paused, old reflex. He got that from her. Sophia was quiet for a moment, respectful of the space around those words. Then she said, "Did she know you were going to end up volunteering at a youth center?" "She knew I was going to need somewhere to put the energy," Nathan said. "She used to say that I was only functional when I had something to protect." He thought about that. She meant it kindly. "It sounds accurate," Sophia said. He looked at her sideways. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching Emily and Caleb, her arms crossed loosely. Her expression in that settled mode he'd been seeing more of since they walked in. "What about you?" he asked. "Did anyone see this coming? The company? The direction?" "My mother," Sophia said without hesitation. "She died before any of it happened, but she would have been unsurprised." She paused. "She also would have had things to say about the hours I keep, such as that building something is not the same as living in it." Sophia said, "She had a gift for sentences that stayed with you longer than you wanted them to." Nathan understood. He had a catalog of those himself, most of them Kate's, some of them Marcus's, a few from commanding officers whose names he'd half forgotten, but whose exact words he could still reproduce verbatim. Across the room, Emily was making Caleb practice a specific sign repeatedly. He couldn't tell which one from the angle. And Caleb was doing it wrong with the same wrong motion each time, and Emily was physically repositioning his fingers with the authoritative precision of a teacher who had identified the problem and was simply going to fix it. Caleb allowed this with admirable patience. "She's bossy," Nathan observed. "Extremely," Sophia agreed. "She gets it honestly." He looked at her again. She kept her eyes on the kids, but there was a slight curve at the corner of her mouth that she didn't bother controlling. The afternoon moved in the unhurried way of events that were shaped by children rather than schedules. Nathan ended up at a table with Marcus, who had arrived late, slightly breathless, and explained that he'd had a board call that ran over, and that he was deeply grateful for the snack table, and two fathers from the same school district who turned out to have teenage sons who'd been through the youth center 2 years back. That conversation went where those conversations always went. Specific kids, specific moments, the question of what actually helped versus what looked like it helped. Nathan stayed in it fully the way he stayed in things that mattered, but part of his attention maintained its usual habit of the room. He watched Sophia navigate the afternoon differently than she'd navigated the gala. Here she was useful in a practical way. She knew the organizers knew the advocacy group's leadership had apparently been involved in funding this particular quarterly event for 2 years without broadcasting it. She carried things. She set up extra chairs when a family arrived with more children than expected. At one point, she sat on the floor next to a small boy of about 5 who was having a hard moment for no apparent reason other than that he was 5. And sometimes 5-year-olds needed someone to sit near them on the floor. And she stayed there until he was ready to get up. Nathan had seen her at the gala, which had shown him one version. This was another version. And it was the version he suspected that explained the first. At 2:30, Emily cornered Nathan near the window where the afternoon light came through at the angle that made the room look less institutional. She signed at him with focused intent. He worked through it. Something about Caleb. Something about good. And then a word he wasn't sure of. "Say that again slower," he signed back. She repeated it. He recognized it this time. "Keeper." "She says Caleb is a keeper," he translated for Sophia, who had appeared at his shoulder. "High praise," Sophia said. Emily signed more. Nathan followed, piecing it. "He didn't make it weird. Most kids make it weird." "She says most kids get uncomfortable," Nathan said. "He didn't." Sophia looked at her daughter with the expression that didn't have a clean name. The one Nathan had first seen at the gala when Sophia turned around and found Emily glowing. "No," Sophia said quietly. "He didn't." Emily signed again, looking at Nathan. "He got most of it." "Does he know how to be a good friend?" Nathan thought about Caleb at home, alone on school nights when Nathan worked late. About the way his son had navigated his mother's absence with a grief too large for a 7-year-old that he'd somehow carried anyway. About the specific maturity that had come out of that. Not cheerful maturity, not uncomplicated, but real. "Yes," Nathan signed back simply. "He does." Emily absorbed this, then she signed something short. "Good. I might need one." Nathan held that sentence for a moment. He looked at Sophia. Sophia had caught enough of it to know the shape. Her expression told him that. The particular way it went, still and soft at the same time. He signed back to Emily, "I think you already found one." Emily looked across the room to where Caleb was now deep in conversation with Jess, signing haltingly but earnestly with Jess correcting him, and Caleb nodding in the focused way that meant he was actually retaining it. She watched them for a moment. Then she looked back at Nathan and signed with the satisfaction of someone updating a record. "I found 2. The event wrapped around 4. Families gathered coats and children. The snack table was depleted in the way snack tables always were at events with children. Systematically. And without apology. Nathan helped stack chairs alongside 2 other volunteers, while Caleb and Emily had a final conversation that had the quality of a negotiation. Both of them using a mix of signs and Caleb's improving attempts and Emily's willingness to slow down for him, reaching some kind of agreement that Nathan didn't catch entirely. In the parking lot, Sophia walked them out. The afternoon had gone cold in that way late autumn afternoons went cold quickly, the warmth dropping as soon as the direct sun did. Emily had her coat on, but had it unzipped because she always ran warm, Sophia explained, which was a constant source of minor conflict. "She hates being told to zip it," Sophia said. "She thinks it's overcautious." "It probably is," Nathan said. Sophia looked at him. "Don't tell her I said that." Emily, who had been watching their mouths, caught enough to look pleased with herself. The parking lot was mostly emptied, a few families still filing out. The hand-painted mural on the building's face caught the late light and looked better than it had going in. More intentional somehow. Nathan noticed that about places doing genuine work, they often looked more real on the way out than the way in. Caleb was going over a sign with Emily one more time, something involving a specific hand shape she was correcting, with the patience of someone who had done this before and didn't mind doing it again. Watching his son's focused face, Nathan thought about Sunday morning kitchen tables, about Kate's handwritten flashcards, about things passed forward in ways no one planned. Sophia stood beside him while their kids finished. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Both of you." "We're glad we did," Nathan said. And then, because it was true, and because he'd spent enough years not saying true things that might cost him something to have gotten tired of it, "I haven't seen Caleb take to something this fast in a while." Sophia looked at her daughter, then back at him. "Same," she said. They stood there for a moment in the particular quiet that fell when something had gone well, and both people involved knew it, and neither of them was quite sure what to do with the fact. Emily finished correcting Caleb's sign, looked up at him, nodded once with the finality of a teacher closing a lesson. Caleb made the sign again, correctly this time, and Emily put both thumbs up. Her own system, Nathan had noticed, which existed slightly adjacent to standard ASL, but communicated perfectly. Caleb grinned. It was the same grin he'd had since he was 3 years old, unguarded and genuine, and it landed on Emily's face as pure recognition. Two kids who had found unexpectedly in a community center on a Saturday afternoon someone worth coming back for. Sophia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, made a small face that meant something professional had followed her into the weekend. "I have to take this. I'm sorry." "Go," Nathan said. She went, stepped to the side, professional voice back on like a coat she'd learned to put on quickly. Walking a slow circle near the edge of the lot, Caleb appeared at Nathan's side. His hands were in his jacket pockets. His breath made small clouds. "Can we see them again?" he asked. "Probably," Nathan said. "Emily wants me to practice," Caleb said. "She says I'm not bad, but I have a lot of gaps." "She's right." "She said she'd help if I wanted." Nathan looked at his son. "Do you want?" Caleb thought about it for about half a second, which for Caleb meant he'd already decided. "Yeah," he said, "I do." Sophia finished her call and came back. Her face had done the thing it did when work had followed her somewhere, and she'd managed it, but it had cost something. A minor cost. Nathan could read the difference now. He handed her a coffee he'd saved from the indoor table before it got cleared. She looked at it, then at him. "Thank you," she said, with the particular tone she used when she meant more than the surface of the words. "It's bad coffee," he said honestly. "I know," she said. "I've had it here before." She took a sip anyway. They walked back toward the cars, all four of them, through the cold October air of the parking lot. Emily kept looking back at Caleb. Caleb kept looking at his hands, practicing something under his breath. That was the signed version Nathan realized of, "I'll see you again." Emily caught it. She stopped walking. Signed back, "You will." Caleb read it, or most of it, and looked at Nathan for confirmation. Nathan nodded. Caleb looked back at Emily and produced with considerable effort and reasonable accuracy the sign for promise. Emily looked at him for a long moment, with those serious brown eyes that saw everything worth seeing and discarded the rest. Then she signed back, slow, clear, deliberate. "Okay." She turned and walked to Sophia's car, matter of fact, already done with the ceremony of it. Caleb watched her go, in the way of 10-year-olds who hadn't yet learned to make less of moments than they were. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he looked up at Nathan. "I'm going to practice tonight," he said. "I know," Nathan said. They got in the car. The October light was going gold at the edges, the sky doing the thing it did in late afternoon before the dark settled in. Nathan pulled out of the parking lot and onto Marchfield Avenue, Caleb beside him, already holding his hands up, working through signs in the passenger seat. Nathan drove, said nothing. Didn't have to. Some things moved on their own once they got started. The weeks that followed the Marchfield event moved with a different quality than the weeks before it. Nathan noticed it first in small things. Caleb practicing signs at the dinner table. Not self-consciously, not as a performance, but the way kids worked on something they genuinely decided to own. Half absent, hands moving through shapes while he read or watched television. The grocery list on the refrigerator that Caleb had started rewriting in a combination of English and ASL notation for reasons he didn't explain and Nathan didn't ask about. One Tuesday, Nathan came home from the youth center to find his son on the couch with his phone, video calling Emily. Or rather, the phone propped on the cushion while both of them signed at each other through the screen. Caleb slow and effortful, and Emily correcting him with the brisk efficiency she brought to everything she considered worth doing correctly. Nathan stood in the hallway and watched for about 30 seconds before backing quietly into the kitchen to start dinner. He texted Sophia, "Your daughter is apparently tutoring my son via video call." Her response came 4 minutes later. "I know, she's been preparing lesson plans." He stared at that for a moment, then typed, "Lesson plans, handwritten with diagrams." Nathan put his phone down and stirred the pasta, and thought about Emily at 8 years old preparing handwritten lesson plans for a 10-year-old she'd known for 3 weeks. And he thought about the gala, and the girl drawing patterns on her palm beside the flower arrangement, and the distance between those two things. And he didn't have a word for what he felt exactly, but it sat in his chest warm and a little sideways. "She's good at this," he sent back. "She's good at everything she decides to be good at," Sophia replied. And then, after a moment, "That part she gets from her father." It was the first time she'd mentioned Emily's father in any context. Nathan read the sentence twice, registered what was and wasn't in it, and decided not to pull on the thread. "That tracks," he sent. "Caleb's the same way." "I know," she wrote. "He told Emily he's been watching ASL videos before school." Nathan had not known that. He went and checked Caleb's viewing history that night after his son was asleep. 40 minutes of ASL tutorial videos. 3 mornings in a row. Starting at 6:15 before Nathan was up. Basic vocabulary. Then a video specifically on conversational pacing. Then one on deaf culture that ran almost an hour, which Caleb had apparently watched in 2 sittings. Nathan closed the browser history. Stood there in the quiet of the living room for a moment. Caleb had never mentioned any of it. He was just doing it. The same way he did most things he cared about, without announcement, without needing the caring to be witnessed. Kate would have known what to say about that. Nathan just made a note to tell him at some point when it didn't come out clumsy that he'd noticed. The 3 weeks after Marchfield involved 4 more video calls. One Saturday afternoon at a park near the neutral midpoint between Nathan's apartment and Sophia's building on the north side, where Emily and Caleb had spent 2 hours arguing about the correct categorization of clouds, while Sophia and Nathan sat on a bench and drank coffee from a thermos he'd brought and talked about nothing significant for 40 minutes, and then gradually about things that were. And one unexpected Tuesday evening when Sophia had a board call run catastrophically late and her backup childcare fell through. And she'd called Nathan apologetic and clearly hating that she had to. And he'd picked Emily up from school and brought her back to the apartment. That evening was the one he thought about most afterward. Emily had walked into the apartment with the careful, cataloging attention she brought to new spaces, taking in the lived-in quality of it, the shelves with too many books and not enough organization, the kitchen table with its permanent homework geography, the couch with the specific dent that meant Caleb spent most of his time at one end of it. She'd examined everything without making it obvious she was examining everything, which was a skill Nathan recognized as close cousin to one he had himself. Caleb had been home deep in a school project involving a poster board and way too much glue. He'd greeted Emily with a sign, a decent one, a real greeting, not the careful practice version, and Emily had answered. And within 7 minutes, they were both at the kitchen table, Emily apparently having opinions about the layout of Caleb's poster. and Caleb apparently being willing to hear them. Nathan made dinner for 3. He stood at the stove and half listened to the signing behind him. The rhythm of it. The occasional sound when Caleb forgot and used words. The sound of Emily laughing when he made a mistake she found particularly good. He thought about Sunday mornings with Kate, about how ordinary an apartment full of people sounded. It had been quiet for a long time. When Sophia arrived at 7:40, still in her work clothes, the tail end of apology on her face, Nathan opened the door before she knocked. He'd heard the elevator. She looked past him into the apartment where Emily and Caleb were at the table. The poster board now significantly improved, both of them deep in an argument conducted entirely in sign. The apology left Sophia's face. She stood in the doorway and looked at her daughter at the kitchen table of a man she'd known for less than 2 months, entirely at ease. And Sophia did the thing Nathan had first seen her do at the gala. That small, involuntary press of her hand flat to her sternum, like something in her chest needed steadying. "She ate," Nathan said. "Pasta. She told me she doesn't like bell peppers, so I left them on the side." Sophia looked at him. Her voice, when it came, had the particular quality of someone managing their composure with a lighter hand than usual. "She hates bell peppers." "I figured." She made a very specific face. Sophia exhaled. "I'm sorry about tonight." "I tried." "Sophia." He said it the way he said things when he meant them to land cleanly. "It's fine. She was no trouble." "That's not—" She stopped, started again. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "You called because you needed someone. That's what people who know each other do." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was still sorting itself out. Not the settled version he'd been seeing more of lately, but the older version. The one that wasn't sure yet how much to trust the ground it was standing on. He held it without pushing the way he'd learned to hold most things. Then she said quietly, "Are we people who know each other?" "I think so," Nathan said, "unless your definition requires longer." She thought about that. Something in her face shifted, small movement but real. "My definitions usually do," she said. "I know," Nathan said. "That's okay." She went inside, said something to Emily. Emily looked up, assessed her mother's expression, and signed something that Nathan caught as, "The pasta was good, and Caleb's poster is better now." Sophia covered a laugh, signed back. Emily looked satisfied and returned to the poster. Sophia stayed for an hour. They sat at the kitchen table after the kids moved to the couch, Emily reading with the efficient focus of someone who consumed books as fuel. Caleb beside her practicing signs from a small notebook he'd started carrying, and Sophia and Nathan talked without a plan about what they were talking about. In the way of people who had passed the point where conversation required a structure. She told him about Emily's father. Not at length, she offered it plainly, without performance. His name was Daniel. They'd been together for 4 years, married for 2 before Emily's illness changed everything. Not because the illness broke them. She was clear about that. Careful to be fair to the truth of it, but because the illness had illuminated things that were already cracked. The way Daniel had needed Sophia to still be the same person she'd been before. The same uncomplicated ambition. And she'd needed him to become someone different. Someone she couldn't tell yet was in him or not. And it had turned out not to be. "He's not a bad person," she said. "He's involved. He calls. He has Emily on alternate weekends." She paused. "But there are certain kinds of hard that people aren't built for. And I think watching Emily lose her hearing was that kind for him." Nathan listened. Didn't qualify it or soften it or fill the spaces. "What was it for you?" she asked. "The kind of hard you weren't built for." He thought about it honestly. "The silence," he said, after Kate. "I'd been in combat. I'd been through a lot of things I don't talk about casually. But I wasn't built for a quiet apartment and a 7-year-old who needed something I didn't know how to give yet." "What did you do?" "Kept showing up," he said. "Got it wrong a lot. Kept showing up anyway." Sophia looked at her hands around her coffee cup, the same scratched watch, the same practical absence of anything decorative that didn't mean something. My company almost collapsed in the year after Emily's diagnosis, she said. I was making decisions with half my attention for 8 months. 2 board members tried to use it to push me out. What happened? I found out, she said. And I walked into that board meeting, and I fired both of them. A pause. There were lawyers involved. It was not clean. Nathan looked at her. Good, he said. She looked up. Something in his directness clearly hadn't been what she expected. Most people say that was ruthless, she said. Most people weren't in that room trying to run a company while their kid was in and out of hospitals, Nathan said. From where I sit, that sounds like someone protecting what mattered. Sophia held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her coffee. Kate taught you well, she said. He didn't correct it. Because she wasn't wrong exactly, but what he'd been thinking of wasn't Kate. It was 12 years of missions where the difference between what looked ruthless from the outside and what was necessary from the inside was something that only made sense if you'd been carrying the weight that required the decision. He was thinking about that when Sophia said without preamble, I want to do something with the sign language program idea. He waited. There are 37 schools in this district without a single ASL-trained staff member, she said. Her voice had shifted. Not colder, but more structured, the voice of someone whose mind had been working on something for longer than she was now admitting. Deaf students are being mainstreamed into classrooms where no one can talk to them, where the interpreter, if they even have one, is covering 3 kids in different grades, where the whole system assumes the child will adapt instead of asking whether the environment can. It won't, Nathan said. The environment without someone making it. I know, she said. That's why I'm thinking about making it. He looked at her fully. She was looking at him with the directness she'd shown him in pieces since the gala. But more of it now. Less managed. What does that look like? He said. I haven't fully worked it out, she admitted, and the admission cost her something just slightly. He could see it in the small tightening at the corners of her eyes, the place where her composure was thinnest. But it starts with funding, and it needs someone who understands what these kids actually need on the ground. Not a consultant, someone who's been in the room. Nathan said nothing. I'm not, she stopped, tried again. I'm not offering you something because of Emily or because of the gala. I want to be clear about that. I know, Nathan said. The work you do at Marcus's center, the way you talk about it. She looked at her coffee again. I've hired a lot of people who said the right things about caring. You don't actually talk about it that way. How do I talk about it? Like it's just what you do, she said. Like it wouldn't occur to you to frame it as sacrifice. He thought about that. It's not sacrifice, he said. It's the only version of the work that makes sense to me. Sophia nodded like that had confirmed something. I need someone to run the operational side, she said. Community outreach, school partnerships, the part that doesn't work from a boardroom. She paused. I'm not asking you tonight. I'm saying I'm going to ask. Okay, Nathan said. She looked at him. That's it? Okay? You said you're not asking tonight, he said. I heard you. She studied him for a moment with the serious, assessing look that he'd seen Emily use. The face of someone deciding how much of what they were seeing was real. Then she said, You're very difficult to destabilize. I've had practice. The question when it came formally came 6 days later over coffee at a place near Marcus's center that Nathan knew because Marcus held informal donor meetings there on account of the good light and the owner who refilled cups without being asked. Sophia arrived before him, which he hadn't expected, and she had papers, actual printed documents, which told him she'd been working on this in the particular way she worked on things she'd decided, which was thoroughly and without half measures. She pushed a folder toward him when he sat down. He opened it. The proposal was 14 pages. He read the first 4 while she drank her coffee and didn't narrate it, which he appreciated. The core of it was a foundation. The Lancaster Communication Initiative, though she told him the name was provisional and she was open to something that didn't have her name in it. Funding for ASL education programs in public schools across the district. Expanding in Year 3 to adjacent districts. Scholarship support for deaf students and their families for supplemental services. A community hub for interpreter services and family support. The director role was defined in 2 pages that read like someone who had interviewed people who knew what the work actually required. "You talked to Marcus," Nathan said. "I talked to Marcus," she confirmed. "What did he say?" "He said, and I'm quoting, Sophia said, that you were the best thing that had happened to that center in the 4 years you'd been there, and that if I offered you something bigger, he'd understand, but he'd also be quietly furious." Nathan smiled at that. Marcus Webb, quietly furious, looked almost identical to Marcus Webb being generous. It was a specific art form. "He also said," Sophia continued, "that you had a background he'd never fully gotten out of you, but that whatever it was had given you a specific ability to be present in situations most people avoided." Nathan looked at the folder. "Did he say anything else?" "He said you still blamed yourself for not being home when Kate died." Nathan went still. The coffee shop moved around them. The sound of the espresso machine. A conversation at the next table about something ordinary. The door opening and closing. Nathan sat with Marcus's words sitting in the room and didn't say anything for a moment. "He shouldn't have told you that," he said finally. "He told me because he said you'd never tell me yourself," Sophia said. "And he thought I should know what I was asking of you. Not to make it easier, to make it honest." Nathan set the folder down. He thought about the Tuesday Kate had died. He'd been at a training exercise, one of the last before his retirement papers went through. Kate had had a headache. She'd told him to go. He'd gone. By noon she'd collapsed in the apartment, and by the time the paramedics arrived, a blood clot fast and catastrophic, and nothing anyone had controlled or predicted. She was gone. Caleb had been at school. Nathan had gotten the call on his cell phone in the parking lot of a training facility 2 hours from home. He'd replayed that morning's leaving more times than he could count. "I was home," he said. His voice came out flat, which was what happened when he talked about it without preparation. "I mean, I left for a training. She said to go. I went." He paused. "She died while I was gone." Sophia was quiet. Not the social quiet, the uncomfortable variety, the real kind, that understood certain things needed room. "For a long time I thought, if I'd stayed..." He stopped. He had a blood clot. The neurologist told me afterward there was nothing I could have done. There was maybe a 40-minute window from first symptom to fatal, even if I'd been there. He looked at his coffee. "I know that. I've known it for years. It doesn't entirely change the math." "No," Sophia said, "it doesn't." He looked at her. "After the board members tried to push me out," she said, "I spent 4 months second-guessing every decision I'd made in the year before, every hour I'd spent at the company instead of at the hospital, every time I'd answered email while the doctors were talking." She paused. "Emily doesn't blame me for any of that. She doesn't even understand there's anything to blame me for. But I've had a list of it since she was diagnosed, and I add to it sometimes, even now." Nathan understood the specific weight of lists like that. "How do you carry it?" he asked. "Badly, sometimes," she said honestly. "Better than I used to." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "The therapist I saw for 2 years after the diagnosis said that guilt was just love with nowhere to go. That it didn't mean anything was wrong with me. It meant I cared about something more than I could control." She paused. "I'm not sure I entirely believe that, but it helps on bad days." Nathan sat with that for a moment. Love with nowhere to go. He hadn't heard it put that way before. He wasn't ready to do anything with it, not fully, but it landed somewhere and stayed. "I want to think about the proposal," he said. "That's all I'm asking," Sophia said. "A week." "Okay." He picked up the folder again, looked at the title page. "The name," he said, The initiative, you should take your name off it. She looked at him. It's not about modesty, he said. Programs with a founder's name on them have a shelf life tied to the founder. You want this to outlast you. He tapped the page. Name it for what it does, or name it for someone the community will understand. Sophia studied him. Marcus said you'd say something like that. Marcus is frequently right, Nathan said. He said that too, she said, and the almost smile was back. The week Nathan took to think about the proposal turned out to be 3 days. Not because he was impulsive. He was specifically not impulsive. Had spent most of his adult life managing the difference between action and reaction. But because by the 3rd day he'd exhausted the reasons to wait and hadn't found any that were more substantial than fear. And fear on its own had never been a good enough reason for him. He called Marcus first. I knew, Marcus said when Nathan told him he was going to say yes. You could have let me figure it out. I did let you figure it out. I just knew what you'd figure. Nathan spent a moment being quietly frustrated with Marcus Webb and then moved on. If I take this, he said, I'm going to need someone good for the Friday sessions. I've got someone, Marcus said. I've been keeping her in reserve for when this happened. You've been planning for this, Nathan, Marcus said, with the patience of a man who had run an underfunded youth center for 11 years through 3 economic downturns and 1 burst pipe. I plan for everything. He called Sophia that evening. Caleb was in the shower. Nathan had confirmed this because this was a call he wanted to make without an audience. I'm in, he said when she picked up. A pause. 3 full seconds. Which from Sophia meant something. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a texture under it. The same texture he'd heard the first night at the gala when she said thank you, with the full weight of everything she couldn't say in a room full of people. We'll need a planning meeting, probably more than one. There are board members who will want to interview you, people who track how the money moves. I've dealt with tougher rooms, he said. I believe you, she said. And then, after a moment, Nathan? Yeah. Emily's going to be very smug about this. He laughed, the same way he'd laughed at the gala over the chocolate tart. From somewhere uncalculated. Why? She told me 3 weeks ago that you'd say yes, Sophia said. She said, and I'm quoting from an 8-year-old's signed sentence, he's the kind of person who says yes to things that matter. Nathan sat with that. She's perceptive, he said finally. Extremely, Sophia said. She gets that from me. The planning meetings happened over the following 3 weeks, 4 of them in Sophia's office, a high floor space that looked like someone who worked hard had stopped trying to make it look like someone who worked hard didn't work hard. There were stacks. There were whiteboards with color-coded markers and stages of use. There was a photograph on the corner of the desk, small and simply framed, of Emily at maybe age 5, in a backyard somewhere mid-laugh, completely unaware of the camera. Nathan noticed it the first day and didn't say anything. He noticed it every day and didn't say anything. On the 4th meeting, Sophia caught him looking at it. She was 5, she said. We were at my mother's house. She looks exactly the same, Nathan said. She's always looked exactly the same, Sophia said with the particular exhausted fondness of a parent whose child had come out of the womb with a fully formed personality and hadn't varied much since. The meetings were, in the factual sense, productive. They mapped the school district partnerships, identified 3 pilot schools with existing advocacy relationships, worked through the director role in enough detail that Nathan stopped seeing it as abstract and started seeing it as a thing that could actually be built. Sophia was good at this, at the architecture of something large, at finding where the structural load needed to go, at the specific clarity of someone who had built one significant thing already and understood what the foundation required. She was less good, he noticed, at stopping. On the 3rd meeting, she'd been there when he arrived at 8 and was still building something on the whiteboard when he left at 6. On the 4th, she mentioned entirely in passing that she'd had 4 hours of sleep. He waited until after the board members left. 2 careful men in careful suits who had asked Nathan 4 questions about his background and seemed satisfied with what they got. And then he said, "You need to sleep more than 4 hours." Sophia looked up from the whiteboard. I'm fine. That's not what I said. I've run unless, she said. I know you have, he said. That's not the same as it being a good idea. She turned back to the board. The Halstead school meeting is Thursday, and the curriculum framework needs to be… Sophia. She stopped. He didn't say anything else. He just held the silence until she turned around. And when she did, her face had the particular look of someone whose momentum had been interrupted, and who wasn't sure if they were annoyed or relieved. Emily needs you functional, he said. The initiative needs you functional. Those two things are not in conflict, but the order matters. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light from the high windows caught the angle of her face, and she looked tired. Genuinely tired. Not the performing competence tired, but the underneath kind, the kind that had been accumulating for a while. You sound like my therapist, she said. I sound like someone who's been watching you for 4 hours, he said. She turned and capped the marker, set it down on the tray with a precision that suggested she was giving the action more focus than it required. My mother used to say I'd work myself down to the wiring, she said. Sounds like she knew you better than most. She looked at the whiteboard, at the photograph on the desk, back at Nathan. Do you ever worry that you're doing all the right things for the wrong reasons? He thought about it honestly. What do you mean? Building something, she said. The company, this initiative now, Emily's support systems, all the programs and specialists and technologies I funded. She paused. Sometimes I can't tell if I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do or because doing is the only way I know how to. She stopped again. Outrun it, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. He understood that. He'd been outrunning things for 3 years before he understood that he was running. And another year before he started to understand that what was behind him wasn't catching up so much as it was trying to walk alongside. And the distinction mattered more than he'd wanted to believe. I think, he said carefully, that you can do the right thing for complicated reasons and it still comes out right. The reason and the outcome aren't always the same question. Sophia considered this. That's either very wise or very convenient. Both, maybe, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer with the expression he'd been trying to find a name for since the gala, the one that lived between the composed version and the real one. He'd come to understand it as the expression she had when she'd stopped managing what she was thinking and hadn't decided yet what to do with the gap. I'm going home, she said. Good. I'll sleep more than 4 hours. Good. She gathered her things. At the door, she paused and looked back at him in the way that people looked back when they hadn't quite finished something. Nathan, she said. Yeah. Emily asked me last night if you were our friend. She said it plainly, with her hand on the doorframe. I told her yes. He held that. You're right, he said. That's what we are. She nodded, a single, settled nod. The kind that meant something had been confirmed that they had both been fairly sure of and were now allowed to say out loud. Then she left. Nathan stayed another 20 minutes, reviewing the framework notes, checking the timeline, making the kind of small adjustments that the work required. Outside the high windows, the city moved in its ordinary, indifferent way. Traffic and people and the light going gold the way it did in late afternoon before the dark came on. He thought about Caleb at home, probably signing to himself in the bathroom mirror. He thought about Emily's handwritten lesson plans with their diagrams. He thought about Marcus on the phone saying, I knew, and about Kate's kitchen table flashcards, and about a girl drawing patterns on her palm under a chandelier while a whole room moved around her like water around a stone. He thought about the kind of person who said yes to things that mattered. He closed the folder, put on his jacket, took the elevator down, and stepped out into the evening. And for the first time in a long time, the city felt less like something he was moving through and more like something he was part of, which was a difference he hadn't known he was missing until it came back. The Cross Sound Communication Initiative launched on a Thursday in early March, in the gymnasium of Halstead Elementary School, with 63 families in attendance, and a sound system that cut out twice during the opening remarks and had to be restarted by a volunteer with a specific expression of pained apology. Nathan had been warned about the sound system. He'd been warned about a lot of things in the 4 months between saying yes and standing at the front of a school gymnasium with a microphone in his hand and 63 families looking at him. He'd been warned by the school principal, who was enthusiastic but chronically overscheduled, by the district liaison, who was careful and procedural in the way of someone who had seen good ideas fail on logistics, by Marcus, who had warned him that the first public event for anything community-based was almost always at least 30% disaster, and that this was normal, and that what mattered was how you handled the 30%. The microphone died a second time during Nathan's third sentence. He set it down, stepped forward without it, and raised his voice the way he'd learned in environments where equipment failure was not a hypothetical. He said, "We're going to figure out the microphone in a minute. In the meantime, anyone in the room who uses sign language, I'm going to sign what I'm saying at the same time I'm saying it. Bear with me if I'm slower than you'd like. I'm still learning too." There was a pause in the room. Then something shifted. The particular shift that happened when people in an audience stopped feeling like they were being presented to and started feeling like they were in the same situation as the person at the front. 3 rows back, Emily watched him with her arms crossed and an expression that contained in roughly equal parts critical evaluation and something warmer that she was not bothering to conceal. Beside her, Caleb was signing the word for microphone to the girl on his other side, who was using a hearing aid and had been watching Nathan's hands since he started. Sophia was standing at the side of the room near the door, with a tablet and a quiet conversation going with the district liaison. She wasn't watching Nathan. Or she was watching him the way she watched things that mattered, which was from angles that didn't look like watching. He'd noticed that about her over the past 4 months, the way her attention worked. He talked about the program for 12 minutes without the microphone. He talked about what it was: ASL instruction integrated into regular school programming, interpreter support, family resources, a community hub that was already operational 2 afternoons a week out of the Marchfield Center. He talked about the pilot schools and the timeline. He talked about what it wasn't, which was a charity, which was important to say, because people needed to hear that this wasn't a gesture, it was infrastructure. And infrastructure required different things from the people using it than gratitude. A woman in the 4th row raised her hand. "My son is in 3rd grade at Delmore," she said. "He's been waiting 14 months for a qualified interpreter. What does this do for him right now specifically, while we're still waiting on the district?" It was not a hostile question. It was the question of a mother who had been in waiting rooms and on hold lines and in meetings with administrators who meant well and produced paperwork, and who had learned that the distance between a program announcement and her son's actual Thursday afternoon was a distance that required specifics. Nathan answered it specifically. He gave her the name of the coordinator for Delmore, the timeline for the interim support resource, the direct number for the hub. He told her that if those answers weren't sufficient, she should call him directly, and he gave her his number. The room was quiet for a moment. Then another hand went up. And another. The microphone came back on at some point. Someone in the back had found the source of the issue, a loose connection in the base. But Nathan barely noticed, because by then, the conversation had moved past the need for it. Afterward, when the gymnasium was emptying and the families were gathered in clusters, doing the particular thing that happened at events like this, not the official part, but the real part, the comparing of notes and the exchange of contacts, and the specific conversations that happened when people who had been managing the same difficult thing in isolation discovered they were not, in fact, isolated. Nathan found himself against the far wall with a cup of bad coffee and the specific tiredness of someone who had been fully present for several hours and could feel the cost of it. Marcus appeared beside him. "The microphone," Marcus said. "I know. Everything else," Marcus said, "was excellent." Nathan drank his coffee. "The woman in the 4th row." "Mrs. Adami?" Marcus said. "She's been fighting the district for over a year. The fact that you gave her a direct number instead of a brochure." He paused. "That was the right call." "It's the only call," Nathan said. I know, Marcus said. That's why you're doing this and not someone else. Nathan looked across the gymnasium. Emily had found Mrs. Adami's son, a boy of about 8, dark-haired, wearing hearing aids on both ears, and they were signing to each other with the quick, familiar ease of two people who had immediately identified common ground. The boy's mother was watching them with an expression Nathan recognized viscerally, the same one Sophia had worn at the gala. The specific unwinding of attention that had been held so long it had started to feel like posture. Caleb was nearby, trying to follow the signs between Emily and the boy, managing about 60% by Nathan's estimate, which was considerably better than he'd have managed 3 months ago. The kids always get there first, Marcus said, watching the same scene. Yeah, Nathan said. The adults make the systems, the kids make the reasons. Nathan looked at him. Did you come up with that just now? I've been sitting on it for about 40 minutes, Marcus admitted, waiting for the right moment. The evening after the launch, all 4 of them ended up at Nathan's apartment. By a combination of proximity and inertia, the event had run late, traffic was bad, Emily had declared that she was hungry in a way that broke no ambiguity, and Caleb had invited her with the casual authority of someone who had decided the boundary between his space and Emily's was largely procedural. Sophia had hesitated at the door in the way she sometimes still did. Old reflex Nathan had come to understand. The one that checked whether she was taking up more than her share. He'd held the door, and she'd come in. He made eggs. It was 9 o'clock, and eggs were what he had that could feed 4 people quickly, and nobody complained. Emily sat on the counter, which Sophia told her 3 times not to do, which Emily acknowledged politely and continued not doing. Caleb set the table with the automatic competence of someone who'd been doing it since he was 7. The kitchen had its particular night sound, the stove, the rain that had started outside, the low conversation of 2 children comparing notes on the launch event with the frank, critical analysis of people who attended things and had opinions. Emily signed to Nathan while he cooked, one-handed, which she could mostly follow now. The woman in the 4th row asked the best question. I thought so too, he said. You gave her your number. She needed a specific answer, not a general one. Emily thought about this, working something through. Then, my mom used to give everyone a general answer. She said it was more efficient. Nathan looked at Sophia, who was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing something on her phone and had evidently caught enough of the exchange to look up with an expression that was equal parts wry and fair. She's not wrong, Sophia said. I've gotten better. Emily signed. Nathan made her better. I didn't do anything, Nathan said. Sophia looked at him from the table. You showed her what specific looked like, repeatedly, in context. She returned to her phone. It's annoying how effective that is. Caleb looked at Nathan with the expression of a 10-year-old who had just filed a piece of information about adults for future use. They ate at the table, the 4 of them, in the comfortable, disorganized way of people who had been doing this long enough that the logistics were automatic. Emily ate her eggs and informed the table through a combination of signs and Caleb's increasingly fluid translations that the pilot school curriculum needed a visual component in the 3rd module, because right now it was too text-heavy, and deaf students who were also visual learners, which was most of them, would disengage. Nathan asked how she knew. She looked at him with the expression of someone whose patience for obvious questions was limited. I am one, she signed. He wrote it down on the notepad he'd started keeping in the kitchen for exactly this kind of thing. Sophia watched him write it and said nothing. But he saw the small movement of something across her face, soft and unguarded, gone quickly. After dinner, Caleb and Emily migrated to the living room with the kind of gravitational inevitability that children had taking their conversation and their ongoing debate about some book Emily was reading with them. Nathan made tea, because Sophia had mentioned once 3 months ago that she preferred it after 9, and he'd remembered without meaning to. He set it in front of her. She looked at the cup, then at him. You remembered. It came up, he said. Once, she said. 10 weeks ago. He sat down across from her. I pay attention to things. She wrapped both hands around the cup. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady rhythm against the window. The kind of rain that made indoor spaces feel more interior than usual. From the living room came the sound of Caleb explaining something, and then Emily's audible response. She was louder when she was animated, not self-conscious about the volume, and Nathan had always privately thought that was one of the best things about her. 4 months ago, Sophia said, I thought this was going to be a program I funded and monitored from a distance. I know, Nathan said. That's not what it became. No, he said. She looked at her tea. I'm not good at... She stopped, started differently. I built a company by being very precise about what I let in, what I gave access to. She turned the cup in her hands. It kept everything functional. It also kept everything at a certain distance. I know, he said again. She looked at him. You say that a lot. Because you usually already know what you're telling me, he said. You're not asking me to explain it back to you. She held his gaze for a moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the rain and the distant sound of the kids. Emily told me something last week, Sophia said. She told me that she used to feel like she lived in a room with glass walls. Like she could see everything happening around her, but there was always something between her and it. She paused. She said she doesn't feel that way anymore. Nathan sat with that. She said, Sophia's voice shifted slightly the way it did when something cost her something to say. She said the walls started coming down the night a man knelt beside her at a party and just talked to her like it was the most natural thing. The rain against the window, the sound of Caleb laughing at something in the other room. She also said, Sophia continued, that she thinks the walls started coming down for me at the same time. She took a breath. She said she could tell, because I started looking like myself again. Nathan didn't say anything. Not because he had nothing to say, but because the moment didn't need him to fill it. Sophia looked at the table. When she looked up, her eyes were clear, but there was something present in them that she wasn't managing. And he understood by now that this was what Sophia looked like when she decided to stop managing something. I don't know exactly what this is, she said. What we are. Beyond friends. She said the word without irony. They'd been calling it that for months, and it had been true, and it was still true. And it was also increasingly not quite sufficient. I'm not asking for a definition tonight, she said, but I wanted to say it out loud, that I noticed the difference between before and now. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, I notice it too. She nodded once, the settled kind. From the living room, Emily's voice rose briefly in the particular indignant pitch she had when Caleb got a sign wrong in a way she found excessive, followed immediately by Caleb's protest, and then both of them laughing. Sophia looked toward the sound. Her face in profile was relaxed in a way it hadn't been the night of the gala. The architecture still there, the structure she'd built because she'd needed it, but worn differently, like clothing you'd chosen rather than armor you'd required. She's happy, Sophia said. Not as an observation, as something larger. Yeah, Nathan said. She's been happy for a while since... He didn't finish the sentence, but the since was clear. He thought about what he wanted to say and whether to say it. He went with it. Kate used to say that the most important thing you could do for a kid wasn't protect them from the hard things, he said. It was make sure they knew they weren't carrying the hard things alone. He paused. I didn't fully understand that until I was the one trying to figure out how to do it for Caleb. It's harder than it sounds. Sophia turned back from the living room. Did you figure it out? I'm still figuring it out, he said. But I think that's probably true for everyone who's doing it honestly. She was quiet for a moment. Then that's either reassuring or terrifying. Both, he said. Usually at the same time. She smiled. The full version, the one that came without deciding to. He'd seen it enough times now to know it by the particular way it reached her eyes, unhurried. 6 months after the launch, the Cross Sound Initiative had expanded to 7 schools, with 14 more in active discussion. The community hub on Marchfield ran 4 afternoons a week and had a waiting list for family services that Sophia was already building the framework to address. 3 of the schools had integrated ASL instruction into their general curriculum, not just as accommodation, but as standard. Hearing children learning alongside deaf children. The normalizing of the language itself, which had been Nathan's specific and stubborn insistence from the planning stages, and which had turned out to be one of the most significant things they'd done. It didn't happen cleanly. Nothing about it happened cleanly. There were school board meetings that ran 3 hours and resolved nothing. There were funding cycles that came in short and required Sophia to make calls she described afterward as exhausting. And Nathan never asked the details of because he understood that some parts of building something required a specific kind of person for a specific kind of room, and his job was to hold the other rooms. There were families who came to the hub in crisis, not the systemic crisis of underserved programs, but the immediate, personal kind. The parent who'd just been told their child's interpreter was being cut. The teenager who'd been mainstreamed into a high school where no one on staff could sign, and had spent a semester in a kind of isolation that Nathan recognized the shape of from a certain gala in November. He dealt with those cases the way he dealt with most things. Directly, specifically, without performing concern. He made calls, he showed up. He sat in rooms with people who needed someone in the room. He wasn't always enough. He learned again that you could do everything right, and some situations still came out wrong. And that this was not a reason to stop. But it was also not a reason to pretend it didn't cost anything. He was honest about the cost. He let Caleb see him be honest about it, which was something Marcus had told him once was one of the most important things a parent could do, and which Nathan had come to believe was true. Caleb, at 11, was now functionally conversational in ASL. His vocabulary had gaps, his grammar had idiosyncrasies that Emily corrected with the consistency of someone who had appointed herself his primary quality control. But when Nathan watched his son sign to a child at the hub who was having a hard day, not performing competence, not announcing his presence, just sitting down and signing, "Hey, what's going on?" he felt something that was the specific inverse of everything he'd been afraid of in the quiet years after Kate. He'd been afraid of failing Caleb, of not knowing how to raise a child through the particular shape of the grief they'd been given, of the apartment being too quiet and the years being too hard. What he hadn't anticipated was that the grief and the specific years and even the quiet apartment had made Caleb into someone who sat beside kids who were struggling and said, "Hey, what's going on?" Had made him patient in the particular way that couldn't be taught, only developed through contact with real difficulty, honestly carried. Nathan didn't believe everything happened for a reason. He'd seen enough of the world's machinery to know it was indifferent. That the things that broke people and the things that built them were often the same things, and the difference was rarely meaningful in the moment and rarely clean in the aftermath. But he believed that what you did with what you were given mattered. That attention was a form of action. That choosing to learn someone's language, literally in his case, or in the 1,000 other forms it took, was one of the most honest things a person could offer another. Kate had taught him that. Not in a speech, in Sunday mornings, in flashcards, in the patient way she'd waited while he got the hand shapes wrong and tried again. He thought about her less painfully now, not less often. He wasn't sure the frequency changed, but less painfully. She had moved in the way of people who had genuinely shaped you from the category of loss to something more durable, something that had become part of the structure. He thought she'd have liked Sophia, not because they were similar, they weren't particularly, but because Kate had had a gift for recognizing the people who were trying hard at something difficult without needing to be admired for it. And she would have recognized it in Sophia immediately. He thought she'd have thought Emily was extraordinary. He thought she'd have been right. On a Saturday in October, almost exactly 1 year after the Harrington Grand, Nathan took Caleb to the Marchfield hub for the afternoon session. It was a regular Saturday by then. Unremarkable in the way that things that had become part of the fabric of a life were unremarkable. Familiar, grounding, real. Emily was there, as she often was on Saturdays. Because she'd appointed herself something between a junior ambassador and an unofficial curriculum consultant, and Sophia had long since stopped trying to schedule it formally and simply brought her. The afternoon session involved 12 children and new ASL instructor named Diane, who had been with the program for 3 months and was excellent, and a project where the kids were making short videos in sign language about things they loved. The topics ranged from dinosaurs to cooking to a 9-year-old's extremely detailed explanation of the plot of a fantasy novel she was reading. Emily was making hers about music. Nathan sat with Sophia near the back of the room, as they often did on Saturdays. Close enough to be available, far enough back to let the room run without the adults crowding it. Sophia had coffee. He had water. She had files on her tablet and was working through them with one eye on the room, which was her standard mode. And he had accepted by now that this was not workaholism so much as the way her attention was built. Wide, parallel, constantly processing. He watched Emily set up her video with Caleb's help. The two of them bickering cheerfully over the angle of the camera in the way they'd been bickering cheerfully about things for 11 months, which had the comfortable rhythm of a relationship that had found its register. "She's going to be difficult to keep up with," Nathan said. "In about 5 years?" "In about 2, Sophia said without looking up from her tablet. "Fair. I'm trying to decide if that's terrifying or exciting." "Both," he said, "usually at the same time." She looked up at that, recognizing the echo. A smile moved across her face, unhurried. She went back to her tablet. He watched the room. Emily had begun recording. She signed directly into the camera with the precise, confident fluency of someone who had been building toward exactly this for years. Not the fluency of someone who'd been forced to develop it, but the fluency of someone who had decided to own it, who had stopped treating her language as a workaround and started treating it as exactly what it was, the most complete and natural version of herself. She was talking about music, about how she experienced it, the vibration of it through floors and chairs, the way she read it in the faces of musicians. The system she'd developed for understanding the emotional architecture of songs she couldn't hear. She signed with her whole body the way the best speakers spoke, not performing, just fully present. The other children in the room had stopped their own projects and were watching her. Diane, the instructor, stood to the side with her hands folded, her face doing the specific thing that faces did when something was better than expected. Caleb, behind the camera, was watching his screen and wasn't bothering to conceal the fact that he was proud. He would have said, if asked, that it wasn't a big deal, that Emily did things like this all the time. He would have been half right and entirely wrong. Nathan felt Sophia's hand close briefly around his forearm. Not a dramatic gesture, barely a gesture at all. There and then gone. He looked at her. She was watching Emily, and her eyes were bright in the way they got when something was larger than she'd been prepared for. And she did not press her hand to her sternum this time. She didn't need to. She'd gotten steadier about holding large things. He'd watched it happen the same way you watched seasons change. Not in a moment, but in accumulation. In the specific weight of ordinary days that added up to something you could only see clearly from a little distance. Emily finished. The room was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of people who have just received something and are still with the receiving of it. Then one of the younger children, a boy of 6 with bright eyes and a hearing aid on his left ear, began to clap. Not because he'd been cued, because he'd seen something he recognized and wanted to respond to it. The other children joined. Diane joined. Caleb turned the camera toward the room and then back to Emily. Emily stood in front of it and looked around at the applause with an expression that moved through several things rapidly. Surprise, pleasure, the beginning of something that might have been embarrassment. And then finally, underneath all of it, something much simpler. She looked like someone who had been heard. Nathan thought about the girl at the gala, the girl drawing patterns on her palm beside the cream roses, the girl who had watched the cellist with her system for reading emotion and sound she couldn't hear, who had asked a man she'd just met whether it was possible to understand music without hearing it. Who had carried the question the way you carried things you'd been sitting with alone for too long? He thought about the distance between that girl and this one. It wasn't that everything was fixed. He knew better than to think in those terms. Emily still had hard days. She still walked into rooms that weren't ready for her. The systems were still imperfect. The progress was still slower than it should have been, and some of the school board meetings still resolved nothing. Sophia still worked too many hours sometimes, and Nathan still woke at 3 in the morning sometimes with the weight of old things. And Caleb still missed his mother, in the specific way that didn't go away, but changed its character, becoming less like absence and more like presence of a different kind. None of it was finished. None of it was going to be finished. But there was Emily, standing in the afternoon light of a community room on Marchfield Avenue, receiving the simple and sufficient fact of being understood. And there was Sophia beside Nathan, steady in a way she hadn't been in November, holding the moment with open hands instead of bracing for it. And there was Caleb, who had learned someone else's language in bathroom mirrors and kitchen tables and weekend afternoons. Not because it was asked of him, but because he'd decided it was worth doing. And there was Nathan himself, who had walked across a ballroom toward a lonely girl because his late wife had spent 2 years teaching him something he hadn't understood the full value of yet. And who understood now, not in a clean, summarizable way, but in the deeper way that understanding settled into you when it came from living rather than from being told, that the things we carry from the people we love don't expire when those people do, that they go somewhere, that they look for somewhere to land. He'd been carrying Sunday mornings and flashcards and a woman's patient voice telling him to try again. He'd brought them across a ballroom, and they'd gone further than he'd ever managed to trace. Diane was wrapping the afternoon session. Children were gathering their things, finding their parents. The particular organized dispersal of the end of a Saturday. Emily moved through the room towards Sophia and Nathan with the ease of someone navigating a space she belonged to, stopping to sign something to the 6-year-old who had started the clapping. Something short and warm. And the boy grinned with the uninhibited fullness that small children had before they learned to portion it. She reached them, looked at Nathan, signed something. He caught all of it. "Did you see?" he signed back. "I saw." She looked at him for a moment with the serious brown eyes that had seen him clearly from the first night. That had never quite given him the easier version of their attention. Then she signed, simple and direct. "Good. I wanted you to." He held that, the room settling around them, the afternoon doing what afternoons did. The ordinary and unremarkable continuation of a life that had, in the space of 12 months, become larger than it had been. He signed back the only true thing. "I wouldn't have missed it." Emily considered this with the brief, evaluative pause she gave things that deserved it. Then she nodded once, the settled kind, the kind that meant something had been confirmed, and turned to her mother and signed something Nathan didn't try to follow, because it wasn't for him. Some conversations were like that, complete in themselves, not needing to be carried forward. He stood in the room with the rain coming back outside and the last of the afternoon light through the high windows. And he thought that this was what it looked like finally, when something you had carried alone for a long time found the company it had always been meant for. Not perfect, not finished, just real.